Hi, everyone. I am historical author Julia Kelly, and I am going to be running a Facebook Live here with an author Q&A, and then also what I'm really excited about, a big cover reveal where I can finally talk about my next book, which is coming up in January 2021. So I've been keeping very quiet about that because I wanted to make it a big surprise for everybody, and now I'm going to get to be able to share that with you. So I'm just going to take one moment here to make sure that I share this live on my page as well, my Facebook page, give people a couple of minutes to come join, and we're going to get started in about 30 seconds, 45 seconds here. So you can watch me post on Facebook very awkwardly while I do this. But I just want to make sure that everybody's able to join in as well, because I know this is something I haven't done for a while, but I've always really enjoyed Facebook Lives. I've really, really enjoyed the chance to go ahead and talk with readers, talk with aspiring writers. I've already had a couple of questions that have come up on my Facebook page, which is a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to answering those. So we're going to get underway. If you do have any questions, any things that you want me to go ahead and talk about, I'm always happy to do that. So you can go ahead and drop them in the sidebar. And while we're waiting, if you just tell me, let's see, where you're watching from and what your favorite last read was, that would be fantastic. I would love to see some of those, and hopefully we can collect some questions and some comments as well. So I think it's time to go ahead and get started. So thank you again very much for coming. Really appreciate everybody who's watching live and everybody who's watching in the repeat as well. This should be a really nice chance to kind of sit down and have a bit of a chat about everything to do with writing historical fiction in particular. Some people are already asking some questions about that, and making sure that that I also get a chance to do a little cover reveal as well. So I'm excited about that in particular. So I am going to do that in a little bit, but first of all, I wanted to address some questions that have come in from the Facebook page and the event that was hosted beforehand. So I figured we'd just dive right in with those. So a lot of questions actually, which I'm excited about. I'm going to start with Janet because I got a lot of things asking about research, and I'm going to try to group some of these together and see if I can get through a few of them, which will really help with making sure I can kind of keep myself on track. Because when it comes to research, there are always a lot of things to talk about, and it's probably the biggest thing that I get asked about when it comes to panels, events, or even just talking to readers at signings and things like that. So I know there's a lot of interest there. So Janet asks a couple of questions, but she starts out asking or saying she'd like to know what my biggest challenge is when researching a new topic for a new novel. Is it staying focused on the original idea, or do you let your research lead you to a different aspect than you had originally planned? So it's a little bit of both when it comes to whether I stay focused on a particular topic or I let things kind of come to me as I continue researching. Typically what I'll do is I'll start with an idea of generally what I want to write about. So for instance, with my book, The Light Over London, I had read a book just by chance a couple months before I had pitched the book, The Light Over London. I'd read a book that talked about women going off to war in World War II and the different things that women did, because I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding about what women's roles were in World War II. I think people know that women played support roles in the military. They know certainly about the home front and the idea of kind of keeping the home fires warm. But there were women doing really kind of incredible things across a broad spectrum of roles. And so I became really interested in the Gunner Girls, who were this group of women who were attached to anti-aircraft gunning batteries with the Royal Artillery. And they were not combat units, but they were about as close as you could get to a combat unit without being in combat. They technically didn't actually fire the guns. So that's how the military got away with the act that said, the act of parliament that said that women actually couldn't be in combat roles. But what they did basically was work on all the calculations, the sighting, setting the fuses, doing all the aiming for these huge anti-aircraft guns that were actually used to defend the skies over London and in other areas, and then into Europe as the war progressed. And what they did was essentially set the gun, and then a male gunner would actually pull the trigger, press the button to actually fire the gun. So I read this story just by chance of an oral history that had been written of one of these gunner girls, and I thought, that's a fantastic idea for a story. I really, really love the idea of talking about the gunner girls. And so what I decided to do was go ahead and start crafting a bit of a story around who one of these women might be. So I had my subject. I knew I wanted to write about the gunner girls and place a character in one of those batteries, and then I had to figure out, kind of working backward, who that woman would be and what she would do. And so as I researched, I built out this character, and I also built out this plot that allowed me to go through and actually create this whole world and write The Light Over London. And one of the great things about going into a book like that with some of your research already done is that you have a pretty strong idea of what you need to be talking about. The problem is I also tend to research simultaneously, because there are things that come up in, questions, various things that you need to account for that you didn't necessarily think about, or at least I don't necessarily think about when I first start writing a book. And so, for instance, I realized my timeline was all wrong. I had set this book in the Blitz, and it turned out that the Gunner Girls. Or I had set this book during a period of time that would not have actually been accurate for those women joining these batteries. So I needed to go back and recast some scenes, recast some motivation, things like that. So I think there are things that will pop up in the research process that will sometimes take me on a bit of a different direction. But the nice thing about writing fiction is, as much as I try to make sure that I'm staying true to the history and I'm not, completely misconstruing where events happened, how they happened, the intent behind all of it, there is a little bit of license that you can take with being a fiction author that is helpful. So sometimes you have to make a decision about, do you go down the path of being incredibly historically accurate, or do you maybe change some details or add some details because you're not able to find those things in research, and that then drives your story. So it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I have a question from Stephanie, who asks, will you say the longest part of writing is the research, the writing or the rewriting? And all in all, how long does it take to write a book, including research and the rewrite? So that's another question I get a lot. It's a very good question, and it is a bit tough to answer holistically. So I'll tell you a little bit about each book that I've done. But first of all, the longest part of the writing process, whether it's researching, writing, or editing, for me, I think probably the longest part where I'm working on my own is the writing process. And that's what I consider the first draft. So I typically, as I said, I'll do a bit of research beforehand. I'll try to really ground my subject in whatever era or time period or group of people that I'm trying to build this story off of. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and sit down and again, simultaneously be doing a little bit of research, but really for the most part, what I'm doing is taking a look at trying to actually get the words down on the page. So for me, writing is a really natural process and I love it, but that doesn't make it any less frustrating sometimes, any less difficult. Sometimes where you start on a story is not necessarily where you end up. And I pitch my books beforehand to my editor. Sometimes the story that I pitch my editor is not quite where we end up when it comes to the final book that comes out, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But typically what I'll do is take a few months to go ahead and actually write the book and work through that whole process. And then after that is done, then we're getting into edits. And edits are kind of broken up into a few different pieces. So just pulling the curtain back a little bit here, talking about behind the scenes. What you're typically doing with an editor is, for me, a first round developmental edit. So those are the really big picture things. Those are sitting there and saying, let's change your character motivation here because I don't think it's quite working, or your timeline's a little off here. The tone of this book needs to change a little bit. Let's work on pacing and make sure that we're drawing the reader in really quickly, or maybe we draw the reader in really quickly and we end really big, but things in the middle are a little saggy. It's called a sagging middle. So we're working through some of those really big things. So typically what I'll do is get a letter. It can be anywhere from 1, 3, 7, 10 pages long from my editor, and it will list out all the things that she thinks need to potentially change about the book. My editors have always been very nice, and typically it's a bit of a compliment sandwich. So they'll say, I love it, I love it, I love it. It's so great. Here are all the things that I think we could need to go ahead and think about changing about this or improving. Usually improving is a big word. And then at the end, it's, this book is going to be so great. I'm so glad you're writing this. So you get a little bit of that experience of some really happy things, and then, yeah, you need to do some work, and then, you know, we'll get there in the end, which is always very, very reassuring. So typically what I'll do then is sit down and do that developmental edit. That can usually for me be about 6 to 8 weeks. The manuscript goes back to the editor. I take a break for a minute, usually a week or two, and then my editor is very fast, so she gets me back either a second round of edits, so if we've gone through and done a really big structural change, or something massive has happened about the book, and I've gone through and really ripped it apart, which has happened in the past, my editor will go ahead and do another round of edits with me where we're looking more at that holistic stuff. If that's not needed, what we'll do is move to the next stage, which is called a line edit, and that's where the editor is going through line by line, just like you used to get in your English classes in school, and commenting on everything that she thinks needs to change. This is where we really get into language and really get into kind of sentence structure and how things are written, how the dialogue is coming across, things like that. And then it goes to a copy edit. So that's when you're in what's called production, which is a little bit more like the copy is set. Now we're searching for grammatical issues, continuity issues. For a long time, I was really bad at timelines, and now I've gotten much better. So my copy editors hopefully are grateful for that. But especially with these war books, and especially with a book like The Whispers of War, that was so... If you've read The Whispers of War, it happens over a relatively short time period. So it's maybe 10 months, maybe even less. But what's unfolding during those months really is dependent on what's happening and how the public opinion is changing throughout the war, because it's a book about a woman who's declared an enemy alien. She's a German expat living in London. And at the beginning of the war, you know, there's a sense that nobody wants internment to happen again because that happened during World War I. But what she's really concerned about is, as she goes through the process of going through a tribunal and being classed as a non-threatening enemy alien, and then public opinion starts to change and the war starts to change as Hitler, if you remember from your history classes, does his blitzkrieg across Europe, and suddenly Britain is really under threat, and there's a real fear that we're on the brink of invasion. Then public opinion really changes. So I really needed to knit some of those things together with the current events that were happening at the time. So in that case, a timeline becomes really important. So that's when a copy editor really shines. And copy editors are magical, incredible people, very detail oriented. And I don't know how books would get published without them. And then after that, it's really into proofreading the book, which means that I go through and a bunch of other people go through and actually look and make sure that there's no lingering typos, things like that. So the editing process is certainly the longest process in terms of total time. But when you're talking about certainly effort, and the part that can be frustrating to me sometimes, it's writing the book. I think on the book that I'm going to be doing the cover reveal for, it took about 5 months to write the draft. And then when I handed that in, we had 2 months in developmental edits, and then did a line edit and a copy edit. We didn't have that second round of developmental edits. So it really ended up being quite a long drafting process. The Light Over London took 6 weeks. And so that was a really, really fast book. And that was one of those things where it was completely fortuitous. The research had basically been done for me beforehand because I was curious and was reading books, and the timing just really worked out. So I think for me, it really can vary in terms of that length of time. So I think, you know, every author is going to be different, and every author will tell you that the writing process is different from book to book. If it wasn't so different from book to book, I think it would cause us all a lot less stress, but we wouldn't have it any other way. So let's see. Anne asks, what keeps you inspired as you write your novels? So she actually asked two questions, so I'll do this one first. What keeps you inspired as you write your novels? It's really fantastic hearing from readers, and I hear from readers relatively frequently, a few people a week, if not more. And so that's really lovely, getting that kind of connection with somebody and hearing that somebody really enjoys what it is that you do, loves your work, finds some sort of enjoyment in your books, because sometimes I feel like I'm lucky enough to sit in my flat and write stories all day, and that's what I would be doing anyway. So it's lovely having that connect with somebody. And then I think, you know, there are really special emails that I've gotten sometimes, including one from somebody who actually was in the ATS, which is the women's service during World War II that the Gunner Girls was based out of. And she actually said how much she enjoyed reading the books because they reminded her of her time in service. They reminded her of her experiences. There were references to nicknames for different things that the ATS girls were supplied with, different parts of the handbook that she said she really recognized. So that was a hugely, hugely gratifying moment to get that email. So things like that really help. And I'm not going to lie, I always dreamed of seeing my books in a bookstore, and I've gotten to do that now, which is really, really pretty exciting. So those things are kind of good inspiration for keeping me moving forward. And then the other question here from Anne, do you read the reviews of your books, and what do you take away from them? I'm not a huge review reader. I'll go through and I'll skim some of them, especially in the early days, just to make sure that nobody's talking about major issues with the book. Nobody's, nobody said it was missing this entire chapter. That does happen sometimes. So, but really for the most part, my feeling is when you put a book out into the world, it's out in the world, and somebody's read it, and that means that that book exists as it is. And whatever my intent was as an author, I can't be standing there and telling every single reader, no, that's what I meant, or, oh, you didn't see or understand what it was that I was saying there. So let me go back and tell you how it's supposed to be. So everybody brings their own attitude and experience and just mindset to reading a book. So I kind of think reviewers are for readers, and I really appreciate them. They're hugely helpful in getting the book in front of other readers and making sure that people are aware of what they might like or what they may not like about their books. And I think, readers who review and book bloggers and booktubers, my sister's a booktuber, so I always have to shout that out. They do an incredibly important job in terms of steering people to the right things for them. So I want to make sure that people are feel free to leave reviews, and I hope the reviews are reflective of the book and not something that I don't have control over, like the cover. But everybody's going to have their own opinion, and so, I think that that's totally valid. And maybe since reviews are for readers and not for me, maybe those are the people who should be reading them. So that's kind of my take on reviews. Alice asks one of my favorite questions. Do you have a favorite time span? Which is a good question. I have jumped around a little bit. I used to be a historical romance author. I was writing in Victorian London and Victorian Edinburgh, which is what I did my undergraduate research on, Victorian London. I love writing in World War II. It was a real education getting up to speed with World War II, because I have definitely got a working knowledge of it, but I don't have such an intimate knowledge of World War II that I know a huge amount and could rattle off stats and trends that were going on during the time period. The war was a fairly substantial time period with many different changes in terms of personal or in terms of public perception, different people had different attitudes, different people did different jobs, had different experiences. So it really was quite something getting up to speed with some new research there. So I've enjoyed both of those quite a bit. I'm fascinated by the 50s, especially in Britain, because you go from austerity measures after the war through to really the swinging 60s, when you're looking at, a huge influx of wealth in the country. Social differences and social roles for men and women have really started to change. You see more and more women entering the workforce. I think it's a really interesting period of time in the US too. But I have to admit, my time period I really want to write about, and I just don't have a book for yet, and haven't had the opportunity to write about, is 1920s, Roaring Twenties New York. I have always been fascinated by that era. I was a swing dancer at university, where I learned how to dance the Charleston and things like that. I think the clothing is really interesting, and all the things coming out of the bright young people in London. I just find that era to be particularly interesting, and you get the boom of cinema and the idea that you have kind of a more of a mass culture than you ever have had before. And so you're starting to see, less and less regional variation in terms of pop culture, and more of sort of things being driven forward by Hollywood and the movies. So I think it's a really, really interesting era. The music's fantastic. The booze is good. So even though there's prohibition in the US. So one of these days I would love to write a book set during that period of time in that city. And New York is a city that I know really well. I lived there for about 9 years before moving to London. So I'd love to get to New York and write about New York. Alice also has a couple of other questions, or one other question. How do you settle on a subject? And she says historical fiction is her favorite genre. It is mine as well. So I settle on a subject by figuring out what I'm interested in. You live with a book for a long time. When you're writing it, you go through a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of nights where you think, what have I done to myself? A lot of moments of being really excited about what you've written. So it's a whole roller coaster of emotions. And for me, I find I really have to be writing something that I feel passionately about, that I'm really interested in, and that I feel like I can sustain that interest for a long time. I went to graduate school because I was a journalist. So I went from a liberal arts college where I have a history degree to journalism school. I went to Columbia Journalism School in their broadcast program. And when you go to Columbia, they say you have got to choose a master's project, a master's thesis. It's a requirement for graduation. Everybody has to do one. And the advice that all the advisors always give is choose something you're really interested in. Because if you choose something you're not interested in, you're going to be working on this year-long project, and you are going to be so immersed in it, and you're just going to be sick of it. And I thought to myself, okay, I really need to choose something I'm interested in. So as I mentioned, I was a swing dancer. And so I chose to do a radio documentary about social dancing and the connection that New York City has to social dancing over the years. It was a bit history, a bit culture piece as well. So it was a 30-minute documentary in 3 parts. And by the end of it, I was definitely ready to be done. But the positive thing was that I still loved my subject. I still liked to dance. I still loved the music. And I think some of my colleagues didn't have that same experience. So I've sort of taken that and applied it to what I do as an author as well. Pick something that I really am interested in, pick something that I think there's enough to write about, and just go wild and enjoy the research process. So that's sort of my attitude and my approach. Okay, let's see. We have another Anne. And if you guys do have questions, please do drop them into the comments, and I'll continue to go through and take a look at what's coming up and what people are asking. So Anne M asks, when is enough research enough? It's an excellent question. And she also asks, do you research as you write, or do you research in advance? When is enough research enough? I don't know that there's ever enough research when it comes to a book. There's always something that may come up, and you may think that you're done, and the reality is there's just more to know, which is one of the reasons it's so interesting. One of the reasons I think you can keep coming back to a time period as an author. So I can write 3 books set in World War II, or I can write a bunch of books set in the Victorian era, or wherever it is that I want to go with my books next. There's just, it's such a rich time period. You know, there's so much to be mined there. So I think for me, I do have to put the brakes on when I say to myself, am I putting things into this book that are just me showing off my research as opposed to me advancing the story? So the book that I'm doing the cover reveal for instance, this actually has nothing to do with World War II and has more to do with gardens, because the book that I'm going to talk about in a minute here, that book is all centered around a historic garden. So I got to be very nerdy, and I don't have a garden myself. I live in a flat in London that sadly doesn't have green space attached to it. But my father is a really talented gardener and always has been. And sort of when I was growing up, I was digging in the dirt next to him and deadheading roses and things like that. So I got to go to him and use him as a bit of a research assistant for this, which was very exciting, and also did a huge amount of reading and thought, you know, gardeners are really passionate about what it is that they love, and so I don't want to mess up the gardening. And so I think I did way too much research and put too much into this book, because when it came back for the developmental edit, one of the notes that my editors sent to me in my edit letter was, maybe we can pull back on the gardening a little bit, which in a book about a garden is saying something. So there's definitely an instance where the research starts to take over, and at some point you're just kind of showing off as an author, as opposed to necessarily going through and doing a service to the story. So I think usually when I start feeling like I'm just putting things in for the sake of putting things in, it's time to cool the research a little bit and maybe focus on some other areas. And that may happen during the draft process, and it may happen during the editing process. It really just depends on the book. And then the other question was, do you research as you write, or do you research in advance? Both. So I'm definitely a person who likes to be grounded in the research to start with. But I also don't want to use research as a procrastination tool. So I do enough to get me going, knowing that I'm going to continue to research and continue to add, because there are just things that are going to come up that I just don't necessarily have at the top of my head as being necessary. So that really helps, making sure that I can still have access to the things I need to have access to, but I have enough to kind of get me going and see what the story actually needs. Carol has a great question, and I always love asking, or I always love talking to people who I'm assuming Carol may be a writer or an aspiring author thinking about writing. I always love talking to people about the business of writing, because I think there's certainly more information available than there was when I first started out, which was a long time ago, almost 10 years at this point. But I still find that there are things that can be difficult to ask and difficult to answer unless you know an author who's been through the process. So Carol writes, if you get a publisher interested in your first novel, are you at a disadvantage regarding the terms if you don't have an agent? So this is really asking about sort of the role of an agent and what that agent is going to do for you, especially if you're at the very, very beginning of your career. So, and this is, since we're talking about publishers, this is traditional publishing rather than self-publishing or indie publishing. So I think this is a great question, because there are a lot of different opinions and different schools of thought about this. So I'm just going to tell you what my opinion and my experience has been, because hopefully this will be one of many opinions that you'll be able to find and kind of make your own decision about what you want to do if you're looking at having, if you're looking at trying to sell your debut novel. So I have found my agent to be absolutely invaluable to my career. An agent, what they do is they represent you and your business interests, but they don't just represent you when it comes to contracts. They don't just represent you when it comes to speaking to publishers. What my agent also does is she steps back and takes a long-term look at my career and says, where do you want to go? How do we get you there? And how do we make sure that we're doing that in the way that's best for you in your life? So just in terms of full full disclosure, which is not a big surprise because I do talk about it, but I do still have a full-time job. So one of the things that my agent really has to take into consideration is, what's my capacity for work? What can I do without burning myself out as an author while still protecting my day job? So that's been really helpful, looking at, okay, I still have a day job. How do we approach this? If I don't have a day job, what can we then do and add to my career and do different things? So it helps with some long-term planning. When it comes to actually selling your novel, your first novel, I found it to be really important to have an agent, or at least at the bare minimum, I would advocate that you look into getting a literary attorney, specifically somebody who works in the publishing world with contracts for creatives. And the reason for that is most publishers operate with something called a boilerplate contract. And that means that their contract is going to look the same from author to author, but then there are going to be small tweaks and things like that that either they put in or that you're going to want to put in. And those things are really important because you're not only looking for the big things that you want to be really careful about, like you don't want to sign all your rights away. If you have the opportunity to maintain your movie rights, your merchandising rights, things like that, you really want to make sure that you do that, because those can be highly lucrative if your book becomes a movie and then there's all this merchandising on after. And that's pretty standard in the industry from my experience. You want to retain as much as in terms of control, and you also want to understand what your contract says and why it says the things that it says. I'm a smart woman. I, have worked with contracts before in my day job. I used to be a journalist, so I've read lawsuits, I've read, public filings, legal filings. I still think it's hugely, hugely valuable to have an advocate for you, looking out for you. And so not only do I have my agent looking out for me in terms of a contract, she also has an attorney that we work with to make sure that things really are in my best interest. And sometimes I tell people it's not necessarily what is in the contract that is so important, but what's missing from the contract that's so important that your agent then goes and puts that in, because you have to be really careful around certain things. So for instance, if your publisher, for whatever reason, decides to stall on selling your book or on publishing your book, in my contract, it gives a date by which, once the book is accepted into production, that book then needs to be published by. Otherwise, they default their right to publish that book, and I can go off somewhere else. Those things are really important because that could potentially tie your career up in a really dangerous and damaging way. So for me personally, I always say consider getting an agent. If you don't want to get an agent, absolutely get an attorney who specializes in literary publishing contracts. It's going to be better that you never have to use that person than that you have to use them and realize that you've signed a bad contract, because you're in a situation where you can't get your rights back, or you have a pen name that you realize you don't own the rights to anymore, and that does happen, unfortunately. So so do be careful with that. And if you are looking to sell your first book, good luck. It took me a while, so don't be heartbroken or discouraged if it takes a while to get that first sale. It will happen. Keep the faith, and if you decide that traditional publishing isn't for you and you prefer to become an indie published author, that is also a fantastic way to form a career. And I have some friends who are wildly successful independent authors, and I'm so proud of the books that they put out. They're absolutely incredible. So good luck, and I really hope that whatever it is that you decide to do, you will have a happy and healthy career. All right, I'm going to take a peek here and see how we're doing in terms of time, because I am one of those people where if I'm allowed to, I'll go rambling on for as long as possible, especially about the business of writing, because I do love it and I do find it fascinating. So let me really quickly take a look at what we're doing here. Do remember, if you would like to drop comments in or questions, I'm more than happy to answer those. I have a couple more questions here that I would love to share some answers with you guys on, but I think we'll go ahead and also take a look here at what's going on. So, all right. So let's see. How did I? Okay, so Susan asks, how did I end up living in and writing about England? That's a great question. So England is not my native home. As you can tell, I was raised in the United States. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, which is still my very proud hometown, and I do love it. But I'm also very happy here in the UK because this is actually my mother's home. So my mom is English, and my parents lived in Los Angeles raising me. Turned out that my parents moved back here to the UK. My sister independently moved back to the UK in a very sweet love story, which I think I have a podcast with my sister, Justine, called You're Never Gonna Read This. And we do get her husband on to talk about their international love story. So if you feel like something a little bit romantic, I'll drop the comments. I'll drop a link in the comments and you guys can listen to that episode. But you know, I realized that the big people in my life were relocating to the UK, and I've always wanted to live abroad. And fortunately, as a citizen, I could do that. So I had the luck of 2 passports and was able to move here, and have absolutely loved being here ever since. So it's been a really lovely opportunity to be a lot closer to family, to be somewhere different and do something a little different from what I had been doing before. I had lived in and loved New York for years and years, but I felt like it was time to move on, and it was something that I wanted to do. So then I ended up moving to the place that I write about. So I'm not in London right now. This is not my usual background for anybody who's watched my videos before. I'm at my parents' house in the countryside, but when I'm in London, I'm actually not far away from some of the places that I do write about in the books, which is a lot of fun, and really is a good opportunity to do a bit of on-the-ground research and be able to sort of walk the areas that I'm writing about. So it's really been a joy, and I'm just so happy that I've been able to do that. So my apologies, guys, here. As I look for comments and questions, I keep popping up on my own feed. So let me see. All right, wonderful. I think we got a couple other ones here, and then I'll get to the big cover reveal. So another question from Janet. She asks, is it hard to write characters that are intended to be unlikable or evil, and how do you get into the mind of those characters? That's a great question. So when I was writing romance, I really enjoyed writing some big villains, some people who are just nasty and awful, and you really, were on the side of the hero and the heroine. And I hope with all my villains, you're not on their side, you're on the side of the hero and heroine. But I will say that with the last couple of books, both The Whispers of War and The Light Over London, I've been trying to really dig in and figure out what it is about the more villainous characters that motivates them. What it is that they think in their mind they're right about. Because I think that that's even more interesting when somebody has their reasons for doing the things that they're doing. You don't necessarily agree with those things, and those things aren't necessarily right, but you can understand the motivation behind why they're villainous. They're not just a character of pure evil. I think one of the classic examples is Heath Ledger's The Joker in the Batman, Christopher Nolan Batman movie. But they have a bit more internal motivation. So for me, it's really important to figure out why it is that this person is doing the things that they're doing. Why it's important to them that whatever it is that they want is in conflict with whatever it is that the hero or heroine wants, and how you can push those two people together and force them to both confront those things. And especially when writing about war, obviously I write about Britain, and I write about women who are active in the military, as well as in other aspects of life. So there is a very clear cut good and evil, which I think is really interesting with World War II books. But I think within some of those individual characters and individual relationships, showing a little bit about what it is that's motivating that villain is really important. So I would love to talk in specifics, especially about The Whispers of War, because I think there are 2 villains in that book who have their own reasons for doing things. They're not the right reasons, and one of them in particular is particularly insidious, but I also don't want to spoil the Whispers of War. So if you really feel strongly about this, you can go ahead and email me and let me know what you think about those villains and why they do what they do. But yeah, that was kind of my hope, and trying to motivate people to act in ways that were logical, even if they weren't things that we agree with or that we believe in. Anne has a question here. How did I decide to write about World War II? In your contract, and then in my contract with my publisher, do you have to stick to a time period of World War II, or can I change to another time period? If I had a chance to write about another time period, what would I choose? The 1920s or the 50s or a whole bunch of other stuff, because I think it's all really interesting. Hopefully I'll have a long career and be able to do all of this. But when it comes to World War II, I read The Shell Seekers by Rosamund Pilcher, and there's some of that set in World War II, and so I became interested. And I became interested also because while there is a lot of conversation about World War II in the US, and a lot of people have grandparents and great-grandparents who served, and that is very much a part of our culture, I think living in London and living near some of the monuments in particular meant it was all the more upfront. And I think the fact that Britain was in the war for so long, and Britain was so impacted by World War I and World War II, and the history is so upfront here, it just became a bit of a natural choice. It was something I was interested in. So I actually, when I initially was talking to my agent about writing for World War II, it's about a different book, which I would love to write at some point. It's a family saga, so it would potentially go over several books, but it would start in World War II and then progress through to the 60s. And we talked about that book, and unfortunately we weren't able to get that particular one sold, but that became the genesis of The Light Over London. And we both agreed that it was a really interesting time period, and it happened to also be what my publisher was looking for. So it was a bit serendipity. They approached me and said, we are interested in you writing historical fiction. We're interested in you changing lines. Can you go ahead and think about World War II Britain? And I kind of went, well, actually, it's really fortunate timing, because that's what I've been thinking of and that's what I've been interested in. So this sort of second part of that question around if I have a contract with my publisher that specifies sticking in that time period, it really depends on how publishing contracts are written. So some people will have very restrictive clauses that say this book is, or this contract is for this book that is a work of historical fiction focusing on women in World War II who are, under threat of internment, which would be the Whispers of War. My contract was a bit more open than that, but things definitely change. I can tell you that the book that I'm about to talk about in a second here, that was totally open. And I was interested in staying in World War II because I think there's a lot more to explore there. And so I just decided that was going to be the right thing for me. So speaking of that, I'll go ahead and keep looking for comments and questions if anything does come up. But I think it may be time to start talking about that book that I keep teasing, because I don't think I can tease around it anymore. I think I actually do have to talk about it and put it out into the world. So I'm very, very excited and really quite proud to show you the cover and talk to you a little bit about my next book, which will come out in January 2021, which is The Last Garden in England. And unfortunately, normally I would do this with a bound copy, and it would look lovely and it would look like a book, but with the pandemic, it's been hard to get access to those types of things. So instead of having an early copy with me, I do have my iPad. So you guys, I will make sure to link this as well on, it's up on my website, juliakellywrites.com, but you can see this is The Last Garden in England. So as I said, it is a garden book, which is why my editor was telling me less gardens, but I promise there's still a sufficient amount of gardens in here. The Last Garden in England is a book I'm really excited and proud of. I'm excited for this book because I'm doing something in it that I've never done before. So I've become a little bit known for writing these books that weave present day and World War II timelines together and share a little bit of secrets and kind of delve into the past, and these stories tend to inform each other. With this one, I decided to be a little bit more ambitious, some would say foolhardy, and go ahead and write a book that had not one, not two, but three timelines that all braided together. I've learned that this is a braided timeline, not just a dual timeline. So these three stories all center around this incredible garden at a house in Warwickshire that doesn't exist, but is modeled on some houses that do exist. The house is called Highbury House, and in 1907 you see the creation of this garden by a female garden designer, a little bit of a maverick and a rogue in her field. She's a woman who is working, a gentleman's daughter who has a job, and she is creating this garden with these incredible garden rooms. So not only does it have sort of the vistas and the things that you would expect from a stately home, but it also has these beautiful garden rooms. So you have the tea garden and the lover's garden and the bridal garden and the children's garden. But right at the heart of it, you have something called the winter garden. And the winter garden is really what this entire book is built around, because you learn about the creation of the garden and what happened to the garden creator while she was creating that garden. Then in World War II, you meet three women who are all linked to this house. One is the owner of the house, Diana. One is a local woman who is sent to work on a farm named Beth. And then you also have Stella, who is the cook for Diana in Highbury House. So Diana's servant. And these three women become tied up not only because of their involvement together with this garden and with this war, but also some secrets that are unveiled throughout the course of the book. And you'll have to read it in order to find out what they are. But then, of course, we move into present day, because I did want to make sure that I got my present day timeline in there. And we meet Emma, who is a garden restorer. So she goes through and actually looks at the history of gardens, looks at what these designs would have been, and brings gardens back to life. And so she comes to Highbury House, and Highbury House is now a mess. The new owners have taken possession of the property from Sidney, the wife's father, who received it from her grandfather. And they go through and not only are Sidney and her husband redoing the house, but they really want to redo the garden. And they want to restore it back to what Venetia, the garden designer in 1907, envisioned for it. And the garden is overgrown, it's been neglected, and the winter garden, the garden at the heart of this entire property, is locked. And nobody's entered this garden in decades. It's overgrown. Nobody has any idea what's in it because it's so covered and thick with foliage that you can't actually see into it. And so Emma starts to chip away at restoring this garden, and she finds not only secrets about the garden's development, but also all of the women who've worked on it as well, and the secret as to why the winter garden is locked and what happened there all those years ago. So that is The Last Garden in England. I am very excited, as I said, to start talking about this and to start sharing things with you. One of the real joys in this book has been the research, because gardens are beautiful, and it gives me an excuse to muck around in my parents' garden, since I don't have a garden myself. So I've been coming up here, doing a little work in the garden, learning about things, putting plants that we have into this book. But then I've also been going around some stately homes and figuring out what elements I want to borrow from what stately home, and creating this garden of my own, which I've now designed my fantasy dream garden, which I hope one day I'll have a house big enough to justify this insane garden with all these incredible garden rooms in it. But it's been so much fun to do that, and it's been so much fun to weave three different stories about three very, very different women all together and make sure that they each have their own story, and it's all told in a way that really weaves together and makes for some hopefully really interesting storytelling. So I'm thrilled about this book. My brother-in-law, just to pitch it a little bit, my brother-in-law read it and told me he loved it and I had made him feel feelings, which he does not feel feelings easily because he is a very stoic Scotsman. He's actually not a very stoic Scotsman. He's just a Scotsman. But he admitted to feeling lots of feelings about this book. And I've just been absolutely thrilled with the way that early readers are responding to it. So that book is going to come out January 2021. I'm going to go ahead and drop a link where you can register your interest in it. Some of you may also already have done that, which is great, and will help me make sure that you're getting all the updates and the behind the scenes stuff. I have plenty of teasers, some author readings planned, different things like this Facebook Live where I'll be talking a little bit more about the book, so I can give you a bit of a sense of what it takes to write one of these books. And you know, I'm really excited about just in general sharing this with you, because this book was an absolute joy to write, and I think it's going to be so much fun. So I think, I think this might be a nice place to wrap up. And again, I'll just really quickly show you The Last Garden in England right here. And I'll make sure to drop a link to all of those things that I've gone ahead and promised in this. So whether it is the incredibly romantic love story that brought my sister to the UK on our podcast, or it's a link to register interest or to pre-order The Last Garden in England, or just some general information. I think it would be a lot of fun to share that with you guys and also hear what you think about the cover. So please do leave me some comments and let me know what you think. I'm really excited to be doing this Facebook Live because this is going to kick off some regular Facebook Lives that I'll be doing at least once a month. So we'll be able to get together and have a chat about whatever it is that you like, whether it's research, writing. I'm going to be doing some things, sharing some of my favorite authors, both historical and not, in the near future, and making sure that I spread the good word about some books, because I've been reading a lot. And I don't want to be reading these books alone. I want to make sure that you're also reading along with me, so that I have some people to talk to about those things. So go ahead and like my Facebook page, and go ahead and check out those links that I'll drop in just a moment here. And thank you again so much for coming to this Facebook Live event, for joining me in celebrating the big cover reveal for this book. And I hope that we'll be able to do this so many more times with so many more books. But in the meantime, we'll just keep doing Facebook Lives and talk to each other, and everybody can nerd out about books together. So thank you guys again, and I'll catch you in the comments.